Kelvin Timeline presents us an opportunity to view the iconic Star Trek characters, such as James C. Kirk, in a different timeline, where different events have affected how the characters turned out compared to their prime timeline versions. Where is Michale Burnham from Star Trek Discovery in the Kelvin Timeline? Greetings Trekkies, welcome to Trek Central, I'm your host Captain Jack, and let's get into it. Ever since Star Trek Discovery first came out, people have asked if the show is set in the Kelvin Timeline. From its reimagining of ships and uniforms, a simple fan hesitation for a new show, to be set before the original series. Discovery is set in the prime timeline, and there's no doubting that. But with Burnham being a ward of a Sarek family, growing up the young Spock, why don't we see her in the Kelvin Timeline? We have a theory that explains exactly where Michale Burnham is during events of the Kelvin movies, such as Star Trek 2009 and of course Star Trek Into Darkness. If you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. First off, for those of you unfamiliar with the separate timelines of Star Trek, let's break it down. The prime timeline of Star Trek is where all the TV shows, TOS and TNG movies are situated, with the earliest show in the timeline being Star Trek Enterprise in 2151, to the latest show in the timeline being Star Trek Picard in 2399. The Kelvin Timeline was created by the temporal incursion of a Romulan mining vessel, the Narada, which was sent back from the year 2387 to the year 2233. Nero, the captain of the Narada, attacked the USS Kelvin upon arrival in the past, the ship carrying the parents of future captain, James Tiberius Kirk, thereby creating an entire new chain of incidents in a timeline known as the Kelvin Timeline. Essentially at the point in the time the timeline split apart, with the prime timeline carrying on as normal, and the new one being created which we refer to as the Kelvin Timeline, as the destruction of the USS Kelvin was the event which created it. The Kelvin Timeline consists of a trilogy of Kelvin movies, Star Trek 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond. Now, with this timeline originating in the year of 2233, and the events of Star Trek Discovery in the prime timeline starting in 2256, we can see the events leading up to 2256 from 2233 change dramatically between the Kelvin and the prime timeline, but the events of Discovery do not actually happen in the Kelvin timeline. Boy oh boy do we say timeline a lot in this video, get ready. Now before we go to where Burnham might be in the Kelvin timeline, let's first talk about the differences in events and the Star Trek galaxy as a whole between Discovery and the Kelvin movies. Let's talk about Klingons. Star Trek Discovery shows that the Klingon Empire is fragmented. The great houses are warring amongst themselves and there is no unity. This is up until the events of Star Trek Discovery Season 1 where T'Kuvma and L'Rell unite the Klingon Empire once more. But why are the Klingons of the Kelvin timeline so different from that of the Prime? Well, after the appearance of the Narada in 2233, it's obviously attacked and destroyed by the USS Kelvin, as was crippling itself, with George Kirk, James C. Kirk's father, doing a maneuver of warp of ramming speed, sending the exploding hulk of the Kelvin into the mouth of the Narada. Now the Narada was stuck in dead space, and was crippled and therefore captured by Klingons. There is a deleted scene which details the fleet of Klingon ships being sent to capture Narada upon finding it in dead space. This obviously wasn't shown on screen, so we cannot consider it canon, but consider it for a moment. If the Klingon fleet was sent to capture Narada, and either suffered heavy casualties capturing Narada, or simply scared from such a monstrous ship appearing in near Klingon space, I can see this being enough of a reason for a great house to put their petty squabbles aside and unite. Knowing there are threats like the Narada next to the doorstep would be a logical thing to do. You're not going to be able to be warring amongst yourself when there's giant dreadnoughts out there. If the Klingon Empire was united due to the appearance of the Narada, then T'Kuvma wouldn't need to activate the Shrine of Kahless in order to unite the Klingon Empire. As such, the Battle of the Binary Stars would never have happened. Now we talked about the creation of the Kelvin timeline and a possible reason why the Klingon Empire is different between the two timelines, but let's focus on Burnham for a second. Michale Burnham became a ward of the House of Sarek after the death of her mother and father, while at the Vulcan colony Dr. Alpha, undergoing a research project for Section 31 to create a time suit, in a project known as Project Daedalus. Now would the events of Dr. Alpha play in the same in the Kelvin timeline? Dr. Alpha was attacked by Klingons, and happened in the year 2236, 3 years after the creation of the Kelvin timeline. If the Klingons had radically changed due to the arrival of the Narada, as we postulated previously, would they still attack Dr. Alpha? In fact, they would. The Klingons raided Dr. Alpha due to the theft of a time crystal stolen by Leland, an operative for Section 31, for use in Gabrielle Burnham's Daedalus project. Time crystals were essentially protected relics in the Klingon Empire, with a monastery of the holy Klingon planet of Boreth protecting them. So the question now isn't whether the Klingons would attack, but would Captain Leland have stolen a time crystal from Project Daedalus in the Kelvin timeline? Leland managed to locate a time crystal from sources on the Klingon homeworld, but told him that one was being sold in a black market near an Orion outpost. However, if the Klingon Empire changed massively after the discovery of the Narada near their territory, Leland might not have the operatives on Kronos, or the time crystal might not have ended up on the black market in the first place. Without a time crystal, Project Daedalus had to look for other avenues of time travel, and the project itself would have been delayed. But let's look at the differences between the timelines of Section 31 to see if a such project would be given resources towards it. The organisations may be the same, but they're quite different in two appearances. Section 31 and the Kelvin Timeline are much more secret than their Discovery counterparts, but have about the same amount of resources at their disposal, if not more. The difference could be that Section 31 became less secret in Discovery due to the outbreak of the Federation-Klingon War. This actually makes sense when we start to talk about Control, but let's continue with Burnham's Project Daedalus as a Section 31 project. Now, would Section 31 of the Kelvin Timeline put resources towards the creation of a time suit? Well, Project Daedalus might have already had the go-ahead and resources before the creation of the Kelvin Timeline. We know from a short trek, The Girl Who Made the Stars, that the Burnhams were stationed on the Taurus 4 Deep Space Research Outpost in the early 2230s. They might have been working on Project Daedalus here before eventually moving to Doctari Alpha. Remember, the only reason the Burnhams were on Doctari Alpha was to charge the time crystal from a nearby supernova. If the time crystal was not stolen, they wouldn't have moved to that planet and been killed by the Klingons. Also worth considering, the destruction of the USS Kelvin might have triggered Section 31 to shift their resource allocation towards creating other Federation means to protect Starfleet and the United Federation planets. In a sense, this could have scrapped Project Daedalus for other projects. One such project that may have diverted resources towards instead of Project Daedalus could have been the Kelvin Memorial Archive in London, which on the surface may seem like a Starfleet archive dedicated to the loss of the USS Kelvin. Underneath was a secret Section 31 facility that developed weapons and trained intelligence officers. We know that Section 31 shifted its resources after the destruction of Vulcan in the year 2258 to deep space scouting, where they eventually discovered Khan Noonien Singh and the Botany Bay. This was told to us in the film Star Trek Into Darkness, so a similar situation may have happened after the loss of the Kelvin. The officers that had managed to escape the USS Kelvin also took with them detailed scans of the Narada, which is why the tech in the Kelvin timeline is much more advanced than its counterpart, the Prime timeline. Section 31 may have also put resources towards understanding this new tech, and using it to protect the Federation. The Burnhams may have even been taken off Project Daedalus to reverse engineer Narada technology. It would make sense that the Project Daedalus didn't go ahead, or at least wasn't successful, as Admiral Marcus, the then head of Starfleet in Section 31, would be using the time suit to stop threats to the Federation instead of his massive dreadnought, the USS Vengeance. Whatever happened, this would mean that Mike and Gabriella Burnham would probably not have died and left Michael an orphan and eventually ward of Sarek of Vulcan, meaning her life would have taken a massive drastically different path than we know in Star Trek Discovery and the Prime timeline. Now, we have talked a little about Section 31 during this video, and the differences between the Kelvin timeline and the Section 31 scene in Star Trek Discovery. The main part of Section 31 scene in Discovery, which we haven't talked about, is Control. For those who don't know, Control was a threat assessment AI utilised by Section 31 and the Admiralty of Starfleet Command to monitor and assess threats to the Federation, and was advanced after the Battle of the Binaries, which may be the reason Section 31 is more open in the Prime timeline during this era. Now, obviously Control was the main antagonist for Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery, but if the Klingon Federation War did not happen in the Kelvin timeline, due to the differences in Klingons between timelines, then the events of Season 2 of Star Trek Discovery could not happen as well. Control, as a threat intelligence system, may actually exist in the Kelvin timeline Section 31. In the novel which inspired the events of Discovery Season 2, Control was actually constructed by the United Earth, before the Federation even existed, and would be incorporated into Federation systems as the Federation came into fruition and grew out of a coalition of planets. So Control may actually exist in the Kelvin Section 31, it could even be the computer system on board the USS Vengeance. But due to the Klingon Federation War not happening, and Section 31 remaining in their secrecy, Control was not advanced to the state it was during Discovery Season 2. Now, what about the USS Discovery? Can it exist in the Kelvin timeline? Well, the Discovery was commissioned during the Klingon Federation War, co-opting the scientists Paul Stamets and Stroll into using their mycelial research into creating a mycelial spore drive for an alternate means to faster-than-light travel. If the Klingon Federation War did not happen, then the US Discovery would not be commissioned and the research of Stamets and Stroll would not be co-opted, meaning it's possible that the ship and its class, as well as the FTL technology, does not exist within the Kelvin timeline. Perhaps even Stamets and Stroll did not even get to work together on mycelial spore drive tech. So the events which Michael Burnham is tied to in Star Trek Discovery would happen extremely different due to the temporal incursion of a Narada and the destruction of the USS Kelvin. Now we've spoken all about the other factors video, let's talk about where Michael Burnham would be in the Kelvin timeline. Burnham was born on Earth in 2226, which wouldn't change in the Kelvin timeline due to that being created in 2233. Before the Burnham family moved to Doctari Alpha, they were stationed on Taurus 4, Deep Space Research Outpost, in the 2230s. which would even be before the Narada arrived in 2233. As stated previously, the Burnhams might have stayed on the station and never moved to Doktari Alpha research facility to finish off a time suit using its nearby supernova to power a time crystal. So what about Burnham? Well, if she did follow in her parents' footsteps, she might have actually ended up in Starfleet, but instead of transferring from a Vulcan Science Academy to a posting on a starship, she might have actually gone to Starfleet Academy and succeeded. Eventually Burnham would be serving on a starship, maybe even ending up in the Shenzo in the Kelvin Timeline. Hopefully she didn't end up on one of the 7 ships that were destroyed by the Narada when they went to help Vulcan, but who knows. What if Burnham followed in her parents' footsteps and joined Section 31? Well then, that's a different matter. Burnham could have gone on to serve at the Kelvin Memorial Archive, which wouldn't be good as it means Burnham might have died when Thomas Harewood leveled the facility, though that only killed 42 people, so she could have survived. Though this is obviously not the only Section 1 facility at the time, with the Taurus 4 Deep Space Research Outpost and the Io facility in the orbit of a Jovian moon, Io. So if Burnham did become a Section 31 officer, there are many facilities she could have served in. We do also know that Section 31 ships do exist. Obviously we have the USS Vengeance seen Into Darkness, but from comics we do see other Section 31 starships. From Kelvin Star Miranda class ships, all new Section 31 ships which resemble the USS Vengeance's style, but were equipped with more advanced cloaking technology. So if Burnham did become a Section 31 officer in the Kelvin timeline, she could even serve, or even at this point be a captain of a very own starship. Whether Burnham might be in the Kelvin timeline is a fascinating thing to discuss and theorize, and that's our video on where we think Burnham might have ended up in the Kelvin timeline, but also the difference between what we see in Star Discovery and the events in the Kelvin movies. Do you have any interesting ideas on where she could be in the events of films like Into Darkness and beyond? Let us know in the video comment section below, because if you're talking about Star Trek, then we want to hear about it. If you want to keep up to date on all related Star Trek news, lore and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. You can also follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends.